If you pull up the federal case files from the 1996 sweeping operation of the Cascade Mountains, you'll find my name, Dr. Elias Thorne, listed in black and white. Beside my name, there's a little checked box that says, Cooperative Witness. It's the funniest thing I've ever seen. Cooperative. If those agents only knew. They sat at my oak kitchen table. They drank my coffee, black, no sugar. They petted my golden retriever, Buster, and they unfolded their topographic maps right there on the table, asking me about bear patterns and migration routes, and the whole damn time, he was less than 50 yards away. He was watching them through the slats of the barn, breathing that heavy wet breath of his. If he had sneezed, if he had shifted his weight on the straw, the entire deception would have collapsed. I would have been in a federal supermax and he would be on a dissection table in a lab in Virginia. People ask me how I did it. How does one man hide an 8.5-foot, 800-pound apex predator in plain sight for 43 years? They think it involves underground bunkers, high-tech camouflage, or some government clearance. It doesn't. It required a bag of marshmallows, a basic understanding of animal psychology, and one simple trick. A trick so stupidly obvious that the smartest agents in the FBI looked right past it. My name is Elias. I was the only large animal veterinarian in this county for 30 years. And this is my confession. To understand the secret, you have to understand the place. And the time. Go back to 1980. We didn't have drones buzzing over the tree line. We didn't have hikers with 4K cameras in their pockets live streaming every twig snap. Up here in the deep valleys of the Pacific Northwest, the timber is so thick it swallows the sunlight by 3 in the afternoon. It's a place where silence is a currency. I was the man you called when things went wrong. If a heifer was breech birthing in a blizzard at 2 a.m., I was there. If a hunting dog got torn up by a cougar and you didn't want the game warden asking why you were hunting out of season, I was the one stitching him up on a tailgate under a lantern. I knew every farmer, every logger, and every recluse in a 50-mile radius. I knew who beat their wife, I knew who was growing pot in the national forest, and I knew who was lying about their livestock count. As a vet, you learn to read pain. You don't need language. A horse tells you it has colic by the way it paws the ground. A dog tells you it's terrified by the dilation of its pupils. I thought I had seen everything biology could throw at me. I thought I understood the anatomy of every living thing in these woods. But science is fragile. It's a glass house. And on a freezing Tuesday in October, 40 years ago, that glass house shattered. I didn't go looking for a monster. I didn't believe in them. I was a man of medicine, of stitches and antibiotics and palpable facts. But when you find yourself kneeling in the mud, staring at a femur bone that is too thick to be human, but too structured to be a bear, your worldview doesn't just shift. It breaks. I've kept this quiet for half a lifetime. The FBI stopped watching my property in 2005. Most of the neighbors from back then are dead or in nursing homes. I'm the last one left who knows the truth about the thing in the barn. I'm tired of the silence. I want you to know how it happened. I want you to know about the infection that almost killed him, the winter that almost broke us, and the bond that formed in the darkness. But mostly, I want to tell you about the trick, because sometimes the best place to hide a giant is right where everyone expects to see a beast. I can still feel the cold dampness of that day if I close my eyes. It was a Tuesday, the kind of Tuesday where the Pacific fog sits so heavy on the valley floor that you have to drive with your high beams on at noon. I had just finished stitching up a Holstein with a barbed wire cut over at the Peterson place when the call came through on the radio. It was Silas Miller. Now you have to know Silas. He was a hard man, a man who had logged these woods since the Depression. He had hands like catcher's mitts and a soul made of cast iron. Nothing spooked Silas, but his voice on that radio was thin, cracked. He didn't say much, just told me to get out to the north ridge of his property, near the old logging cut. He said he had an animal down. He said it was wrong. When I pulled my truck up to the edge of the service road, the silence hit me first. Usually these woods are alive. Jays screaming, squirrels chattering, the distant hum of wind in the Douglas firs. But that day, dead silent. It was a vacuum. The air smelled metallic, a mix of wet decay and something sharp, like sulfur or a struck match. Silas was standing by his truck, clutching a .30-06 rifle. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. He pointed down the embankment toward a deep, jagged gully choked with devil's club and blackberry brambles. "I ain't going down there, Doc." he whispered, not taking his eyes off the tree line. I set a bear trap 2 days ago. Something's caught. But listen to it. I strained my ears. I expected the guttural roar of a black bear, or maybe the high-pitched shriek of a cougar. What I heard made the hair on my arm stand up like static electricity. It was a whimper. A low, rhythmic, vibrating moan. It sounded heartbreakingly human. It was the sound of a child trying not to cry, but magnified through a chest cavity the size of a rain barrel. I'll check it out, Silas. You stay here. Keep a lookout, I said. I grabbed my leather medical bag, heavy with glass vials and steel instruments, and started the descent. The slope was steep. Mud slicked my boots, and thorns tore at my canvas jacket. As I got lower, the smell changed. It wasn't just the forest anymore. It was the heavy copper scent of blood, mixed with a powerful musk. It smelled like a wet dog, but amplified by a factor of 10. I reached the bottom of the gully. The light was dim down there, filtered through the canopy. And there, half hidden behind a fallen cedar log, I saw the trap. It was a monstrosity of iron, rusted and cruel, chained to the base of a tree, and clamped tight within its jaws was a leg. My brain tried to process the anatomy. That's what we do as vets. We categorize. Species? Age? Condition? My first thought was grizzly. We don't get many that far south, but it happens. But then I looked closer. The anatomy was impossible. A bear's leg is built on a different fulcrum. This leg, the ankle joint, was distinct. The Achilles tendon was thick as a tow rope, defined and taut. The foot, or what I could see of it, was long and flat. And the hair, it wasn't fur. It was hair. Long, matted, dark chocolate strands that were soaked in mud and blood. I followed the leg up. He was slumped against the muddy bank, his massive back turned slightly toward me. He was curled in on himself, clutching his shin with hands that were undeniably, terrifyingly hand-like. Not paws, hands. Huge, leathery, dark-skinned hands with thick black fingernails. He must have heard my boots sucking in the mud because he turned his head. I stopped breathing. Time didn't just slow down. It stopped. I was looking at a face that evolution forgot. A high sagittal crest ran along the top of his skull, giving him a cone-headed appearance that spoke of massive jaw muscles. His brow ridge was heavy, shading eyes that were set deep in the skull. But it was the eyes themselves that broke me. They weren't the black, reflective voids of a shark or a reptile. They were amber. They had whites. And in that moment, they were wide with shock. He didn't roar. He didn't lunge. He simply looked at the trap, then looked at me, then looked back at the trap. It was a look of pure intellectual comprehension. He knew he was trapped. He knew I was another biological entity. He was assessing if I was a predator or a scavenger. The size of him was overwhelming. Even sitting slumped in the mud, he was huge. I estimated his weight instantly, vital for dosing, at somewhere around 800 to 900 pounds. His chest was a wall of muscle under that shaggy coat. I saw the wound. The teeth of the trap had bitten deep, likely fracturing the tibia. Blood was pooling in the mud, dark and arterial. He was losing volume fast. If he went into hypovolemic shock, his heart, as big as a watermelon, I assumed, would stop. My hand hovered over my bag. My mind was screaming, "Run! Run up the hill! Tell Silas to shoot. This is a monster. This is the boogeyman." But my heart saw a patient. I saw a living, breathing creature in agony, and he was terrified. I could see the tremors running through his vast deltoid muscles. He was shivering. "Hey," I whispered. The word came out like a croak. I cleared my throat and tried again, using the tone I used for spooked stallions. "Hey there, big fella. Easy now." The creature stiffened. His nostrils flared, taking in my scent. He let out a sharp huff of air, steam billowing into the cold October air. He pulled his lips back, revealing teeth that were a nightmare of biology. Broad, flat molars for grinding, but canines that were 2 inches long and thick. But he didn't attack. He was waiting. I slowly, agonizingly, slowly, crouched down. I avoided direct eye contact, a universal sign of aggression in the animal kingdom. I looked at his chest, at the mud, anywhere but those amber eyes. "I'm going to help you," I murmured, narrating my movements. "I have medicine. Medicine for the pain." I unlatched my bag. Click. The sound echoed like a gunshot. The creature flinched, his massive hand tightening on his leg. a low growl rumbling in his chest like distant thunder. "It's okay," I said, my voice shaking. "Just a bag. See?" I pulled out the bottle of ketamine and xylazine, a heavy cocktail, enough to knock out a draft horse. I drew it into a large bore syringe. The liquid looked clear and innocent, but it was the only thing standing between me and a gruesome death. I had to get close. I had to get within arm's reach of a creature that could snap my spine like a dry twig. I stood up. I held the syringe visible in my hand. I took one step. He watched the needle. He tracked it. And then, something miraculous happened. He looked at the needle, then he looked at his trapped leg, and then he looked at my face. His expression shifted. The aggression dialed back a fraction of a percent. It was a calculation. Pain is bad. The man offers a change. Is the change worse than the pain? I took another step. I was 5 feet away. The smell was overpowering now. Musk, pine, and blood. I could feel the heat radiating off his body. "I'm going to make you sleep, big guy," I whispered. "Just a little sleep." I lunged forward, not aggressively, but decisively. I aimed for the heavy muscle of the shoulder, avoiding the thick mat of hair as best I could. He flinched, his arm jerking up to swat me. If he had connected, he would have taken my head off, but the pain in his leg anchored him. I drove the needle in and depressed the plunger. 1 second, 2 seconds. He roared then, a sound that wasn't a whimper anymore. It was a blast of noise that vibrated my ribcage, a sound of betrayal and fury. He thrashed, the trap clanking violently against the tree. I scrambled back, slipping in the mud, falling on my ass, scrambling crab-like away from his reach. But the chemistry was already working. His movements became sluggish. The roar turned into a confused grunt. His eyelids, heavy and dark, began to droop. He looked at me one last time, his head swaying like a drunkard's. The amber fire in his eyes dimmed. He slumped forward, his massive chin hitting his chest. I sat there in the mud, panting, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I waited 5 full minutes. Silence returned to the gully. I crawled back toward him. I reached out and touched his arm. It was solid as an oak tree, warm and alive. I had a monster unconscious in a ravine. Silas was waiting at the top of the hill, and I had maybe 20 minutes before the drugs wore off. I had to make a decision that would end my life as I knew it. The silence that follows a chaotic event is heavy. It presses on your eardrums. Down there in that gully with the fog swirling around my ankles and an 800-pound hominid unconscious at my feet, the world felt very small and very dangerous. I looked at my watch. The ketamine cocktail I'd administered was a guesstimate based on bare physiology. If his metabolism was faster like a primate's, I might have 15 minutes. If it was slower, like a sloth, I might have killed him. I didn't have time for philosophy. I had to get that trap off. I grabbed the trap setters, 2 long iron handles used to compress the springs, from where they had fallen. I jammed them onto the rusted springs of the bear trap. I put my boot against the creature's massive, hairy thigh for leverage and pulled. The springs groaned. Rust flaked off into the mud. My biceps burned. The jaws of the trap slowly, grudgingly yawned open. The damage was ugly. The iron teeth had punctured deep into the gastrocnemius muscle, and I could see the white flash of the fibula bone. It wasn't a clean break, but it wasn't shattered. It was fixable. If I had a sterile operating room, if I had an assistant, if my patient wasn't a cryptid. I quickly wrapped the wound in pressure bandages from my bag, winding them tight to stop the bleeding. His blood was dark, almost maroon, and thick. It clotted fast, a survival trait I noted. "Doc, you all right down there?" The voice came from the top of the ridge. Silas. My heart slammed against my ribs. I looked up. I couldn't see him through the brush, but I could hear him racking the slide of his rifle. This was the moment, the fork in the road. If I yelled, "Silas, come down here," he would come. He would see the beast, and knowing Silas, he would put a bullet in its brain before I could finish a sentence. He would see a monster, a threat to his livestock, a devil. Then the sheriff would come, then the state police, then the men in suits. This creature would end up stuffed in a museum or dissected in a government basement. I looked down at the face of the creature. In repose, without the fear, he looked strangely peaceful. There was a dignity to the structure of his face. He wasn't a monster, he was just another earthling, one that had managed to stay hidden until bad luck caught him. I made the decision. "I'm fine, Silas," I yelled back. My voice cracked, but I forced it steady. "It was a bear, a big rogue male." "A bear?" Silas shouted back. "Is he dead?" "No, the tranquilizer didn't take fully. He tore loose and ran off down the creek bed. He's gone, Silas. He's heading for the deep timber." I held my breath. It was a flimsy lie. If Silas came down to check the tracks, I was done. There was a long pause. Then the sound of Silas spitting on the ground. "Damn. Well, as long as he's off my land. You need a hand climbing out?" "No. I'm gonna clean up this mess. I'll meet you back at the house later." I heard his footsteps crunching away. He was relieved. He didn't want to find a demon. He wanted a story he could understand. Now came the impossible part. I had to move 900 pounds of dead weight out of a ravine and into my truck before he woke up. I scrambled up the bank, slipping and clawing at the roots until I reached my truck. I backed it up to the very edge of the logging road, risking dropping the rear tires over the precipice. My truck, a '74 Ford F-250, had a heavy-duty winch on the front bumper. I unspooled the steel cable, dragging the hook down into the gully. It took me 20 minutes of sweating, cursing, and praying. I wrapped the cable around the creature's chest, under the armpits, padding it with my canvas jacket so the wire wouldn't cut his skin. I engaged the winch. Whirr. The cable went taut. The creature's body dragged through the mud. It was grotesque and undignified, but it was the only way. Inch by inch, he slid up the embankment. I had to stop every few feet to guide his head so he wouldn't hit a rock. When I finally got him to the road, I was exhausted. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely operate the tailgate. I lowered it. I used a system of planks and the winch to leverage him into the truck bed. He filled the entire back of the pickup. He was too long. His knees were bent, his massive feet pressing against the wheel wells. I threw a heavy, oil-stained tarp over him, tucking it in tight. From the outside, it just looked like a pile of logging equipment or hay bales. I jumped into the driver's seat. My hands were covered in his blood. The cab smelled like him. That musk was permeating everything. I started the engine. As I drove down Silas's driveway, I waved at him on his porch. He waved back, none the wiser. I was smuggling the discovery of the millennium past a man drinking iced tea. The drive home was the longest 40 minutes of my life. Every bump in the road felt like a catastrophe. I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, expecting to see the tarp rising, expecting a furious, confused hand to smash through the rear window and grab my neck. "What are you doing, Elias?" I asked myself. "You are a veterinarian. You are a pillar of the community. You are kidnapping a Sasquatch." But when I thought about the alternative, the cages, the cameras, the scientists probing him, I knew I was right. I wasn't kidnapping him. I was granting him asylum. I lived on an old dairy farm about 10 miles out of town. My nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. I had a large barn, the lower level built of stone, cool and dark, originally meant for milking cows. It had heavy oak doors and barred windows. I backed the truck right into the barn floor. I shut the double doors. I barred them. Only then did I turn off the ignition. The silence of the barn was different from the woods. It was intimate. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light coming through the cracks in the wood. I pulled the tarp off. He was still out, but his breathing was changing. It was faster, shallower. The ketamine was wearing off. I checked his leg again. The bleeding had slowed, but the wound needed debridement and stitches immediately. I set up my field lights. I grabbed my surgical kit. I was threading a suture needle when he moved. It wasn't a thrash, it was a low, guttural vibration that shook the floorboards. His eyes opened. This time, there was no fog of drugs. He was awake. He was in a strange building, and I was standing over him with a needle. I froze. I didn't have the tranquilizer gun loaded. I had nothing but a scalpel and my voice. He pushed himself up to a sitting position. The tarp slid off his massive shoulders. He looked around the barn. At the hay bales, the tools hanging on the walls, the light bulb swinging above. Then, his gaze locked on me. He didn't roar. He let out a sound I will never forget. It was a chirp, a high-pitched, questioning chirp, like a bird, completely incongruous with his size. He pointed a long, dark finger at his leg, then at me. He was asking me a question. "Are you the one hurting me, or are you the one fixing me?" I took a deep breath, stepped into the light, and gave him my answer. Before I tell you what happened when the sheriff's cruiser rolled up my driveway 3 days later, I need to ask you a favor. If you're getting value from this story, if you want to know the truth about what's really out there in the woods, please hit that like button. It helps get this confession out to more people. And honestly, after 40 years of silence, I want the world to hear this. And let me know in the comments. If you found a creature like this, would you have helped him? Or would you have called the authorities? I read every comment. Now back to the barn. The surgery was a dance of trust and terror. I didn't have enough ketamine to put him back under. I had to use local anesthetic, lidocaine, injected directly into the wound edges. Have you ever tried to stick a needle into a creature that can crush a bowling ball with one hand while he's fully awake? He sat on the straw-covered floor, leg extended. I knelt beside him. Every time I touched the raw flesh, his muscles rippled like water under that dark fur. He let out low, rumble-strip growls, but he never pulled away. He watched my hands. He watched the needle go in. He watched the black nylon thread pull the skin together. 42 stitches. When I tied the last knot and snipped the thread, he let out a long exhale that smelled of pine needles and decay. He leaned forward. I froze, and he sniffed the bandage. Then, he looked at me. He reached out with one finger, a finger as thick as a cucumber, and touched the center of my chest. Just a tap. It was a thank you. But saving his life was the easy part. Keeping him alive, that was the nightmare. The first week was a crash course in logistics. Do you know how many calories a 900-pound hominid burns just by existing? I did the math based on gorilla metabolism and scaled it up. He needed roughly 15,000 to 20,000 calories a day. I couldn't just go to the grocery store and buy 50 steaks. People talk in small towns. The cashier at the IGA would notice. Big barbecue this weekend, Doc? So I improvised. I bought sweet feed, a molasses-coated grain mix for horses, by the pallet. I claimed I was boarding horses for a friend. I bought crates of apples and 50-pound bags of dog food. He ate it all, but he hated the dog food. He would pick out the kibble and throw it at the wall. He loved fruit, and as I discovered by accident when a bag fell out of my pocket, he had a weakness for marshmallows. That sugar rush was the only thing that made him docile when the pain in his leg flared up. But the real challenge wasn't food, it was the noise and the smell. A creature that size produces waste. The barn began to smell like a zoo. I had to muck out his stall every night at 3 a.m., burying the waste deep in the woods where the coyotes would scatter it. I burned incense in the barn, claimed it was for flies. Then came the Wednesday the world came knocking. I was in the kitchen brewing coffee, watching the barn through the window. I always kept one eye on the barn. I saw a dust cloud on the road. A white Ford Bronco with the county seal on the door turned into my drive. Sheriff Brody. My stomach dropped to my shoes. I wiped my sweaty palms on my jeans and walked out onto the porch. Brody was a good man, but he was nosy. He stepped out, adjusting his belt. "Morning, Elias." "Morning, Sheriff. What brings you out?" I tried to keep my voice casual, but my heart was hammering so hard I thought he could hear it. "Funny thing," Brody said, leaning against his hood. "Silas Miller is telling folks at the diner that you hauled a monster out of his ravine. Said he saw tracks the size of snowshoes. Said you told him it was a bear, but he's claiming it walked on 2 legs. I laughed. It was a dry, brittle laugh. "Silas has been dipping into his own moonshine again, Sheriff. It was a bear. A big rogue black bear with mange. Looked ugly as sin, dragging its back leg. I patched it up and let it go deep in the state forest." Brody looked at me. He looked at the barn. The barn doors were closed, but the top window was open for ventilation. From inside the barn, a sound drifted out. Thump. It was the sound of a heavy foot shifting on the wooden floorboards. Brody's head snapped toward the barn. "You got livestock in there, Doc? Thought you retired from boarding." Just an old bull I'm watching for the Petersons." I lied. The lie tasted like ash. "He's ornery, kicks the stall." Brody narrowed his eyes. He walked toward the barn. "I should take a look. If there's a rogue bear like Silas says, it might have circled back. Barns are magnets for bears looking for feed." "No need, Sheriff," I said, stepping in his path. "Elias," Brody said, his voice dropping an octave. "Step aside." He walked past me. He put his hand on the heavy iron latch of the barn door. I closed my eyes. This was it. He was going to open the door. He was going to see the 8-foot giant huddled in the corner. He would draw his gun. The creature would defend itself. There would be blood. Creak. The door swung open. Sunlight flooded the dark interior. Brody stepped in, hand on his holster. I followed, terrified. The barn was empty. The stall where I kept him was open. The straw was matted down, but there was no giant. "See?" I said, my voice trembling. "Just empty stalls." Brody looked around. He sniffed the air. "Smells like a zoo in here, Elias." "Strong disinfectant," I said quickly. "For the infection." Brody walked a lap around the barn. He poked a pitchfork into a hay bale. "Nothing." He finally shrugged. "All right. Tell Silas to shut his trap. He's scaring the tourists." He walked back to his cruiser and drove away. I waited until the dust settled. I waited 10 full minutes. Then I ran back into the barn. "Where are you?" I hissed. Above me in the hayloft, the rafters groaned. He hadn't run away. He had climbed. With a broken leg, silently as a spider, 900 pounds of muscle had pulled itself up 20 feet into the shadows of the rafters when he heard the car. He was pressed flat against the roof beams, blending perfectly with the darkness in the wood. I looked up, and 2 amber eyes blinked at me from the gloom. That's when I realized he wasn't just an animal. He understood concealment. He understood threat. He knew what the sheriff represented. And that was the moment I knew we were in this together. He wasn't my prisoner. He was my partner in the deception. But the sheriff was just the beginning. The rumor Silas started hadn't just reached the diner. It had reached the state capitol. And soon men with much better equipment than a Ford Bronco were going to come looking for the monster of Miller's Ravine. Winter in the Cascades doesn't ask for permission. It kicks down the door. By November of 1980, the snow was 4 feet deep. The world outside turned white and silent. But inside my barn, a strange new domesticity had taken root. His leg healed. It took 6 weeks for the bone to knit enough for him to put weight on it. I called him Ben. I don't know why. Maybe because it sounded gentle. Maybe because it was the name of the brother I lost in Vietnam. It just fit. When the cast finally came off, I opened the barn doors wide. I stood back, my breath pluming in the icy air. I pointed to the tree line, a stark black wall against the white snow. "You're free, Ben," I said. "Go home." He walked to the doorway. He sniffed the wind. He looked at the endless expanse of snow. Then he looked at the pile of warm straw in the corner, the crate of apples, and the heat lamp I had rigged up. He turned around and sat back down. He knew. He knew that out there, with a limp in 3 feet of snow, he was vulnerable. Or maybe he was just lonely too. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a temporary rescue mission. This was a life sentence. And keeping a secret of this magnitude demands a price. You don't get to live a normal life when you have a prehistoric relic sleeping 50 feet from your bedroom. The first casualty was Sarah. Sarah was the town librarian. She had a laugh that could make you forget the rain and eyes that saw right through you. We had been talking about marriage, we were looking at rings. But you can't have a fiancé when you spend 4 hours every evening in a locked barn. You can't have dinner parties when you have to play loud classical music to mask the sound of a giant coughing. You can't explain why your grocery bill is triple that of a single man. The rumors started. Small towns run on rumors like cars run on gas. People whispered that I was drinking again, or that I had lost my mind, or the worst one, that I was seeing someone else. One night in February, Sarah came over. I met her on the porch, coat buttoned tight, blocking the door. I couldn't let her in. I had just tracked in mud mixed with Ben's waste and the house smelled like a bear den. "Elias," she said, her voice trembling, "why won't you let me in? Why are you always in that barn?" "It's just work, Sarah. A sick bull. Very contagious." She looked at me and I saw the light go out in her eyes. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the key to my house I had given her. She dropped it on the porch railing. It made a small metallic chink that sounded louder than a gunshot. "I can't compete with whatever you're hiding, Elias. If you don't trust me, we have nothing." She waited. She waited for me to say, "Come in. Let me show you. Let me show you the miracle." But I couldn't. If she knew, she became an accomplice. If she told someone, even by accident, Ben would be dead. "I'm sorry," I whispered. She walked away. I watched her taillights fade down the driveway, a red blur through my tears. I stood there in the cold until my hands were numb. Then I turned and walked to the barn. Ben was awake. He was sitting up, holding an apple in his massive hand. He looked at me. He made a soft crooning sound, a sound of comfort. He reached out and touched my shoulder. His hand was heavy, warm, and covered in coarse hair. but the touch was gentler than any human's. I sat down in the straw next to a creature that science said didn't exist, and I wept for the life I had just thrown away. That was the sacrifice. I traded love, reputation, and normalcy for the burden of being the keeper. Over the years, the quasi-disasters, almost disasters, came in waves. There was the time the meter reader from the electric company decided to take a shortcut behind the barn. I was in the kitchen when I saw him heading for the rear window, the one Ben liked to look out of. I ran out the back door, barefoot in the mud, screaming like a maniac. Get back, the dog is rabid!" The poor guy dropped his clipboard and sprinted to his truck. I had to pay a fine and get a rabies certificate for a dog I didn't own, but the secret held. Then there was the drought of '88. The water table dropped. My well ran dry. I had to bring in a water truck. The driver, a chatty kid named Toby, insisted on backing the truck right up to the barn to fill the troughs. Ben was in there. It was 90 degrees. The smell was intense. Toby sniffed the air. "Jesus, Doc, what are you feeding in there? Smells like a locker room for gorillas." I froze. "Experimental feed," I stammered. "High protein." Toby laughed and reached for the door handle. "Let's take a look." I grabbed his wrist. I didn't mean to squeeze hard, but the adrenaline turned my grip into a vice. "No. Biosecurity hazard. You open that door, I lose my license, and you lose your job." Toby pulled back, rubbing his wrist, looking at me like I was psycho. All right, chill, Doc. I was becoming the crazy old vet of the valley, a recluse, a weirdo. And that was exactly what I needed to be. Because nobody pays attention to a crazy old man. They avoid him. But the biggest threat wasn't the neighbors. It was the pattern. Ben was getting comfortable, he was getting bored. He started testing the boundaries. He would pace the barn at night. He would scratch at the door. And then, I realized I couldn't keep him a prisoner forever. I needed a system. I needed a way to let him out without being seen. That's when I developed the protocol. Every morning at 3 a.m., the deadest hour of the night, I opened the back doors. Ben would slip out like a shadow. He moved with a silence that defied physics. He would roam the deep woods behind my property, hunting small game, stretching his legs, visiting the creek. But the rule was absolute. He had to be back by 5:30 a.m. before the first logger truck hit the highway. I trained him with a whistle, a dog whistle pitched so high humans couldn't hear it, but his ears, sensitive enough to hear a beetle walking on a leaf, picked it up instantly. 1 blow, safe. 2 blows, freeze. 3 blows, come home immediately. It worked for a decade, until the technology changed, until the satellites got better, until the hikers started carrying GPS. And then came the day the black SUVs appeared on the horizon. The day the simple trick would face its ultimate test. I had sacrificed my love life. I had sacrificed my reputation. But as I watched those federal agents set up a perimeter around my land, I realized I might have to sacrifice my freedom. Because they weren't looking for a bear anymore. They were looking for him. Years turned into decades. The 80s bled into the 90s. My hair turned from salt and pepper to white. Ben just got more magnificent. His fur thickened, turning a silver-tipped gray around the shoulders, like a silverback gorilla. We developed a language that didn't need words. It was a language of grunts, looks, and gestures. If he tapped his chest twice, he was thirsty. If he paced in a figure 8, he smelled a storm coming. If he sat with his back to me, he was sulking because I hadn't brought him marshmallows. But the most profound thing was his capacity for stillness. He could sit for hours, just watching a spider spin a web in the rafters, with a look of absolute wonder on his face. He wasn't a beast of rage. He was a philosopher in a fur coat. I started leaving the radio on for him. He loved talk radio. I think the sound of human voices soothed him. One night, I found him humming. It wasn't a tune exactly. It was a low, resonant vibration that mimicked the cadence of the announcer's voice. He was trying to talk. But the moment that changed everything, the moment that sealed our bond in blood and soul, happened in the winter of 1996. It was the year of the great ice storm. The power lines were down all over the county. The trees were snapping like gunshots under the weight of the ice. My farmhouse was freezing, powered only by a sputtering generator. I had to go out to the barn. The heat lamps were off. Ben was tough, but 10 degrees below zero is dangerous for any biological entity if they aren't moving. I needed to bring him extra blankets and a kerosene heater. I wrapped myself in layers, grabbed the heater, and stepped off the back porch. The world was a sheet of black glass. I didn't make it 5 steps. My boot hit a patch of invisible ice. My feet went out from under me so fast I didn't even have time to gasp. I landed hard on my right hip. Crack. The sound was sickening. It was the sound of a dry branch breaking, but it came from inside my own body. Pain exploded in my brain. White-hot, blinding pain. I tried to stand, but my leg wouldn't listen. It just flopped uselessly. I screamed, but the wind snatched the sound away. I was lying on the ice 20 yards from the house, 50 yards from the barn. The generator was chugging loudly, drowning out my cries. The cold was already seeping through my coat. I tried to crawl, but the pain made me vomit. I lay there for 10 minutes. My fingers started to go numb. The snow was falling on my face, not melting. I realized, with a terrifying clarity, I am going to die here. I am going to freeze to death in my own backyard. I closed my eyes. I thought about Sarah. I thought about the secret in the barn that would die with me. Then, I felt the ground vibrate. Thump, thump, thump. It wasn't the frantic footsteps of a human. It was the heavy, rhythmic gait of a titan. I opened my eyes. Through the swirling snow, a massive shadow loomed over me. It was Ben. He had broken out. He must have heard my scream, or maybe he just felt that I was in trouble. He had ripped the heavy oak door off its hinges. I saw the splintered wood later. He stood over me, snow gathering on his massive shoulders. He looked down, his amber eyes wide with concern. He made a sound I had never heard before, a soft, high-pitched mewling, like a kitten. "Ben," I whispered. "Help." He didn't hesitate. He knelt down in the snow, indifferent to the cold. He scooped his hands under me. "Now you have to understand. I'm a big man. With my winter gear, I weighed over 220 pounds, and I had a shattered hip. If he wasn't careful, he could cripple me for life." He lifted me as if I were a feather pillow. His grip was firm but impossibly gentle. He cradled me against his chest. I could smell him, that familiar musk of pine and wet dog. I could feel the immense heat radiating from his body, warming my frozen blood. I could hear his heart beating, a slow, powerful thud-thud, thud-thud against my ear. He didn't take me to the barn. He walked to the back porch of the house. He climbed the stairs, the wood groaning under his weight. He stopped at the back door. He knew he couldn't fit inside. He looked at the door handle. He knew how it worked. He turned it with 2 fingers. He pushed the door open. He leaned in and gently, so gently, set me down on the linoleum floor of the mudroom. He pushed the heater and the blankets in after me. I looked up at him. He was standing in the doorway, the blizzard raging behind him, filling the frame. A monster. A savior. "Thank you," I wept. "Thank you, brother." He looked at me one last time, checked that I was safe, and then he slowly pulled the door closed. Click. I crawled to the phone and called 911. When the paramedics came, they said I was lucky to be alive. They asked how I got back inside with a shattered hip. "Adrenaline," I lied. Must have been adrenaline. But as they loaded me onto the stretcher, I saw the muddy, massive footprints on the porch. And I saw something else. One of the paramedics, a young guy, was staring at the mud on the door handle. It was smeared high up, too high for a human, and there was a tuft of long, dark hair caught in the latch. He looked at the hair, then he looked at the woods, then he looked at me. He didn't say anything, but I saw the look in his eyes. It wasn't belief, it was suspicion. The circle was closing. That young paramedic had a cousin in the state police, and the state police worked with the feds. My hip healed, but my safety didn't. 6 months later, the black sedans arrived. This is the turning point, the moment where the secret started to leak. In the next chapter, the FBI arrives, and I have to execute the simple trick to save Ben's life. It's a trick so bold and so risky I still can't believe it worked. If you are hooked and want to see how this showdown ends, please subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. You do not want to miss the climax of this confession. Now, let me tell you about the day the agents came for coffee. The day the world tried to take him began with a low hum. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of 6 engines approaching in perfect unison. I was sitting on the porch, peeling an apple. I knew they were coming. My friend in the sheriff's office had tipped me off the night before with a cryptic phone call. "Federal sweep. Tomorrow. Hide your contraband, Elias." He thought I was growing marijuana. He had no idea. At 9 a.m. sharp, The convoy turned into my driveway. 3 black Chevy Suburbans and a specialized animal control van with reinforced grating. The dust they kicked up coated my hydrangeas in gray silt. Men in windbreakers spilled out. They didn't look like the local boys. These men moved with the efficient, jerky precision of insects. They had earpieces. They had sidearms. And terrifyingly, they had thermal imaging scopes slung around their necks. A man in a suit walked up the steps. He was young, clean-shaven, with eyes that looked like they had never blinked. "Dr. Elias Thorne?" he asked. It wasn't a question. "That's me," I said, not standing up. I kept peeling the apple. The skin curled off in a single red ribbon. "I'm Special Agent Vance. We have a federal warrant to search this property and the surrounding 300 acres. We have credible reports of an unlicensed exotic animal, potentially dangerous, being harbored on these premises." He held up a piece of paper. I didn't look at it. "Help yourself," I said, gesturing with the knife. "Barn's open. Coffee's on the stove if you boys get thirsty." Vance stared at me. He expected resistance. He expected me to shout about my rights. My compliance threw him off balance for a split second. "Check the barn," he barked into his shoulder mic. "Team 2, take the perimeter. Team 3, get the dogs." The dogs. That was the variable I feared most. You can fool a man's eyes, you can even fool a thermal scope if you have thick enough walls, but you cannot fool a bloodhound's nose. I sat there and watched them swarm my life. They kicked open the barn doors. I heard them shouting clear commands. "Clear left, clear right, check the loft." They spent 20 minutes in there. They poked every hay bale. They scanned the rafters with their thermal gear. They even lifted the floorboards where the old drainage system used to be. Nothing. Vance walked back to the porch looking annoyed. "The barn is clean, but it smells, Dr. Thorne. It smells like a primate house at the zoo." "I treat a lot of animals, Agent," I said calmly. "Cows, pigs, horses. Musk lingers in old wood." "We'll see," he said. He signaled the K9 unit. A handler brought out a Belgian Malinois, a sleek missile of a dog. "Find," the handler commanded. The dog put its nose to the ground. It zigzagged across the yard. It went to the barn door, whined, and then turned. It caught a scent on the wind. My heart stopped. The dog started pulling the handler toward the driveway, toward my truck. Specifically, toward the rusted, beat-up 1978 livestock trailer hitched to the back of my Ford F-250. This was the simple trick. The night before, after the phone call, I hadn't run Ben into the woods. That's what they expect. They have helicopters with FLIR, forward-looking infrared. If a heat signature that size moves in the forest, they see it. The woods were a trap. Instead, I had done the one thing nobody expects. I walked Ben right out the front door of the barn and loaded him into the horse trailer. It was a claustrophobic metal box, maybe 6 feet by 8 feet. I covered the floor in heavy rubber mats to dampen sound. I stacked hay bales around the interior walls to insulate his body heat from the thermal scanners. I put Ben in there. I told him, using our sign for freeze, a flat palm pressed down, that he could not move, not an inch, not a twitch. He was curled up in the darkness of that trailer right now, parked 10 feet away from the agent's shiny Suburban. The dog was barking at the trailer now, scratching at the metal door. "What's in the trailer, Dr. Thorne?" Vance asked. His hand drifted to his holster. The other agents turned, weapons raising slightly. I stood up. I made sure my face showed fear. Not fear of them, but fear of what was inside. "Agent, call that dog back," I shouted, dropping the apple. "Don't let him near that trailer." Vance paused. "Open it." "I can't do that," I said, my voice rising in panic. "That trailer is under quarantine. I have a prize bull in there that I was hauling to the incinerator in Spokane this afternoon. He's got vesicular stomatitis. It's highly contagious to other animals." I used the big words, the medical words. "If your dog breathes that air, he'll be dead in 3 days. And if you boys track that virus back to the local farms on your boots, you'll be responsible for wiping out half the cattle industry in the state." I stared at Vance. "Do you want to be the guy who explains to Washington why the beef market crashed? Or do you want to shoot the lock off and see for yourself?" Vance looked at the trailer. It was rusted, covered in bird droppings. It looked like death. He looked at the dog, which was now whining. He looked at me. I held his gaze. I didn't blink. I was channeling every ounce of authority I had as a doctor. "Back the dog off," Vance muttered. "Sir?" the handler asked. I said, "Back the damn dog off. We're not here for a sick cow." The handler yanked the leash. The dog barked one last time, a frustrated yelp, and was dragged away. Vance turned back to me. "We're going to sweep the woods. If we find anything, we'll be back." "You do your job, Agent," I said, sitting back down. "I'll sit here and pray my bull doesn't die before I get to the city." They spent 6 hours in the woods. I heard them shouting. I heard the helicopter buzzing the treetops. And the whole time, Ben sat in that metal box, silent as a stone, listening to the men who wanted to kill him. He didn't sneeze. He didn't shift his weight. He trusted me. At sunset, the agents returned. They were covered in burrs, sweaty, and furious. They hadn't found a single hair. Vance walked up to the porch one last time. He leaned in close. "You're hiding something, old man," he whispered. "I can feel it." "Feeling isn't evidence, son," I replied. He stared at me for a long moment, then turned on his heel. "Pack it up, we're moving out." I watched the taillights fade into the dusk. I waited until the sound of the engines was gone. Then I waited another hour, just in case they left a straggler. Finally, under the cover of darkness, I walked to the trailer. I unlocked the side door. "Ben?" I whispered. A massive shadow unfolded from the hay. He stepped out, stiff and cramping. He looked at the empty driveway. He looked at me. He didn't make a sound. He just reached out and rested his heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing gently. We had won. We had fooled the FBI with a rusted trailer and a lie about a sick cow. But as I looked at him, standing there in the moonlight, I knew it was over. We had won the battle, but we had lost the war. They knew he was here. They wouldn't stop. They would come back with better sensors, better dogs. I looked at Ben, and he looked at the mountains, the high, rugged peaks of the North Cascades, where the snow never melts and no man goes. We both knew what had to happen next. The decision to leave wasn't made with a handshake or a spoken word. It was made in the silence that followed the agent's departure. The farm, once my sanctuary, had become a cage. The air felt thin, violated. Even though the FBI had packed up their black SUVs and driven away, the invisible net they had cast over my property remained. They would be back. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week. But bureaucracies are patient, and secrets have a way of rotting if you keep them in the dark too long. I waited until 2 a.m. That is the hour of the wolf, the time when the human world is at its weakest, deepest sleep. I didn't turn on the lights in the house. I moved by the memory of 40 years navigating the hallways like a ghost. I packed a bag, but not for me. I packed for him. I grabbed the last crate of Honeycrisp apples, his favorite. I took the heavy wool blanket he had slept on since the ice storm of '96, the one that smelled like wood smoke and musk. I took the waterproof first aid kit I had customized for his physiology. Oversized sutures, industrial disinfectant, antibiotics strong enough to treat a rhino. Walking to the trailer felt like walking to the gallows. The night was cold, a precursor to the early autumn frost. The gravel crunched under my boots, sounding like firecrackers in the stillness. I tapped on the metal side of the trailer. Tap, tap, pause, tap. Our code. A low, vibrating thrum answered from inside. He was awake. He was waiting. I climbed into the cab of my Ford F-250. The truck was old, a beast of iron and rust that drank gas and leaked oil, but I trusted it more than I trusted any living person. I turned the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then roared to life with a defiant growl. I let it idle for a minute, warming up the fluids, listening to the rhythm of the pistons. We rolled out of the driveway without headlights. I navigated by the moonlight reflecting off the gravel road. Every shadow looked like a federal agent. Every rustle in the bushes looked like a sniper. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, aching with a phantom pain. We headed north, away from the town, away from the cell towers and the power lines. The drive was a blur of tension and memories. I watched the odometer tick upward. Mile 10, mile 20, mile 50. With every mile, I felt a physical ripping sensation in my chest. I wasn't just transporting an animal. I was dismantling my life. For decades, my entire existence had revolved around the secret in the barn. Who was I without him? Just a lonely old man with a bad hip and a sold-out soul. We hit the logging roads around 4 a.m. This was the dead end. The map called it Sector 4, a jagged scar of wilderness that pushed right up against the spine of the North Cascades. The asphalt gave way to dirt, and the dirt gave way to rocks the size of softballs. The truck groaned. The trailer bounced and rattled. I winced with every jolt, imagining Ben back there, tossed around in the dark. But I couldn't slow down. The sun was chasing us. The incline became brutal. The air thinned. The trees changed from Douglas firs to twisted, stunted hemlocks that clung to the rock face for dear life. We were entering the alpine zone. The world up here was gray and blue, indifferent to human suffering. Finally, the road simply stopped. It didn't taper off. It ended at a washout where a landslide had taken the mountain back a decade ago. A sheer drop of 1,000 feet fell away to the left, into a valley choked with mist and ancient, unmapped forest. I killed the engine. The silence that rushed in to fill the void was deafening. No birds, no wind, just the tick-tick-tick of the cooling manifold. I sat in the cab for a long time. My hands were shaking. I didn't want to open that door. As long as the door was closed, he was still mine. He was still safe. But I knew the math. I knew the probability. If I kept him, we both died. If I let him go, he lived. I stepped out. The cold bit through my flannel shirt. I walked to the back of the trailer. The latch was cold and wet with dew. "Ben," I whispered. My voice sounded small against the vastness of the mountains. I threw the latch. Clang. The door swung open, revealing the black interior. For a moment, nothing happened. Then a massive hand emerged, gripping the metal frame. The steel groaned under the pressure. Ben stepped out. He was magnificent. In the barn, he always looked too big, cramped, contained. But here, against the backdrop of the glaciers and the endless timber, he fit. He stood 8.5 feet tall, his breath pluming in the dawn air like smoke from a dragon. He stretched, his spine cracking audibly, his dark fur rippling in the mountain breeze. He looked at the valley. He inhaled deeply, tasting the scent of elk, of pine resin, of ozone. He knew this place. It was in his DNA. Then he turned to me. He looked at the truck. He looked at the crate of apples I had set on the ground. He looked at the blanket. He understood. This wasn't a field trip. This was a one-way ticket. He took a step toward me. The ground trembled slightly. I looked up into those amber eyes. Over the years, I had seen fear in them, pain, curiosity, and even humor. But today I saw something else. I saw gratitude, and I saw sorrow. "You have to go," I said, my voice cracking. I pointed to the tree line. "Go high. Stay away from the roads. Stay away from the men in the black cars." He didn't move. He just watched me. He reached out with that massive hand, a hand that could crush a skull like a grape, and extended one finger. He touched the tears running down my cheek. The skin of his fingertip was rough like worn leather, but his touch was as light as a moth's wing. He made a sound. It wasn't the chirp. It was a low, rumbling vibration in his chest, a purr that resonated in my own bones. It was a sound of comfort. He was comforting me. He leaned down, bringing his massive face level with mine. For a second, our foreheads almost touched. I could smell him, the wild, ancient smell of the earth. "Goodbye, Ben," I whispered. He pulled back. He looked at me one last time, memorizing my face. Then he turned. He didn't run. He didn't scramble. He walked. He walked with a fluid, terrifying grace toward the edge of the washout. He stepped over the guardrail as if it were a twig. I ran to the edge. I looked down. He was moving down the slope, sliding and stepping through the scree with impossible speed. He was already 100 yards down, a dark shadow merging with the trees. He stopped. He turned back. He raised one arm in the air, a silent salute. Then he stepped into the tree line. The forest swallowed him. The branches closed behind him like a curtain being drawn. I stood there until the sun crested the peaks, bathing the world in blinding golden light. I stood there until my legs went numb. I waited for him to come back. I waited for him to realize he needed me, but he didn't need me. He never really did. I was just the pause in his journey. I was the waypoint. I walked back to the truck. I closed the trailer door. The sound echoed like a gunshot in a canyon. I drove down the mountain alone, the empty trailer rattling behind me, lighter than air, heavier than the world. 2023, the present day. The farm is gone now. I sold it in 2005 to a developer from Seattle who wanted to grow organic grapes. They tore down the barn in a week. I watched from the road as the bulldozers smashed the oak beams where Ben used to sleep. I watched them pour concrete over the soil where we had shared apples in silence. They never found the hidden compartment under the floorboards. I made sure of that. I burned the medical records, the x-rays, the blood samples. I burned it all in a barrel the night before I signed the deed. I live in a small A-frame cabin now near the coast. The salt air is good for my lungs but bad for my arthritis. I'm 82 years old. My hands shake when I hold my coffee cup. But my mind is still back there in the gully. Sometimes late at night when the wind comes howling off the Pacific, I turn on the radio. I listen to the static between the stations. And sometimes I swear I hear it. Not a wolf, not a siren, a call. A long, mournful, multi-tonal howl that starts low and climbs to a shriek before fading into a rumble. The experts say the Sasquatch is a myth. They say if they existed, we would have bones, we would have DNA, we would have bodies. I smile when I hear that. I smile because I know the truth. They are smarter than us. They are kinder than us. And they know how to hide. I check the online forums sometimes under a fake name. I see reports from hikers in the North Cascades. Saw a massive dark figure on the ridge. Found a footprint near the glacier. I read them and I hope he's still out there. I hope his fur is white now, matching the snow. I hope he found others. I hope he told them about the vet who didn't shoot. I'm telling you this story now because I can feel the clock winding down. My heart is tired. I don't want this story to vanish when I do. We live in a world that wants to dissect everything. We want to put magic in a cage and sell tickets, but some things are wild, and they need to stay wild. So, here is my final request to you. If you are ever hiking in the deep timber and the woods go suddenly silent, if you smell wet pine and musk, if you feel eyes watching you from the shadows, don't raise your camera. Don't look for the shot. Just bow your head, say hello, and walk away. Let them have their secrets. God knows they've earned them. My name is Elias Thorne. I was a keeper, and this was my confession.